I know most of you know me, but my name is Sandy, and I was born and raised here in southern Missouri. I was born kind of into shame. We'll just get right into it. My dad was married to my mom's sister when I was conceived, and luckily we had a wonderful family that encouraged mom to go through with the pregnancy and not to, the alternatives, which in my eyes there really is no alternative. But so that started out kind of awkward for me, and then my dad took off. We didn't see him until I was 17, I think, when he called the first time, but we'll get more into that. I grew up single mom, 4 children. My mom has her own demons, and I think some mental health issues, but she tried as hard as she could. And like I said, I had my grandparents, so I was never really without a father. I had a praying grandma. She was wonderful, and just a grandpa that stepped up, and did everything he could to help. I was, at 8 years old, I went to Killeen, Texas to visit my older brother and sister's father, and was sexually assaulted by a military man while I was down there. And when I tried to tell on him, I was told to keep my mouth shut because I could ruin the man's career. And so I wanted to be a good child and not do that, think of others. And so I just bottled it up. We flew back to Missouri a couple of weeks after that happened, and my grandma knew something had happened to me down there, but she didn't know what. And my mom started seeing changes in me. My grades, I started failing school. I was mad all the time. I couldn't make friends. And for a long time, I didn't even really remember much about that summer. I met the Lord the first time at Smyrna Baptist Church when I was 11, and we lived out there and things were getting better. Mom was happy she was married again. I had a little sister, someone to love on, and I got to go to church camp, and I realized that Jesus or God was my father, that I didn't really need, and I knew then that ministry was my calling, but I didn't know, I didn't have those mentors in my life to get me to that point. We moved around a lot. We moved to Springfield, and I stopped going to church out there, and things had gotten better. My grades started to improve. I had a family. I had a dad and I had a mom and a little sister, just things were going better. And then my mom decided to divorce my stepfather, and we moved to Joliet, Illinois, which is a really big city compared to what I'm used to. And I witnessed a lot of things that a child my age should not have witnessed. There was grown men hitting on me at the age of 12. Following me and my sister around because I babysat my little sister a lot, and they thought I was her mother, so they thought I was already sexual active, so they was attracted to that. And like I said, there was just a lot of gangs, and it was a prison city. They was famous for their prisons, and when everybody got out, they didn't have anywhere to go, so they just stayed there. And that was like 90 or 91. In 93, to get away from the violence and the despair that I felt up there, I came down to see my cousin get married, and told my grandma I didn't want to go back, and she just, doors wide open, you're not going back if you don't want to go back. And things started to get better. I started making friends. We was going to hay swings every weekend. This is part of it's kind of hard, and I cry every time. But I made my first real good friend I made that was a female that really showed me wasn't a female that really showed me how a guy should treat a gal, was my friend Nathan Bruton.
Didn't mean to interrupt.
We became friends, and he called me every day after school. I mean, I had a few other friends, but every day between 4:15 and 4:30 he would call. 1994, May 24th of 1994, he called me. It was 4:24 in the afternoon. I remember looking at the clock when the phone rang, and we was talking, and I heard some voices, in the background. Some people came to his door, and I heard some laughing, and he said, "Well, Sandy, I'm going to go get into a fight, and I'll just call you when I get back. I just got to straighten this boy out. He's been bullying some of my friends." Well, Nathan, he never came back. They found him dead the next day in a field close to his home. He was murdered by one of the boys that I heard in the background. And that traumatized me for a long time, knowing that I heard that voice, and there was nothing, I didn't do anything to stop it. I thought it was my fault because I talked to him and I didn't say anything to anybody. I felt bad for his mom. I couldn't look her in the face for a really long time. And again, my grandparents, they did everything they could, but nobody was ready. Nobody was prepared to respond to that. I was going to church every Sunday, and I finally, I won't say I let it go, but I didn't let it go. It stayed in here. And it still obviously bothers me to talk about it because I cry every time I think about it. But shortly after that, well, I started smoking cigarettes and I started drinking to numb that pain a little bit. I had one bad relationship with a boy after another. If there was a good relationship, I ruined it with my lack of trust and just possessiveness because I was scared. Anytime something good happened to me, I was scared that it would leave, and I wound up destroying a lot of things because of that. I met my first husband. I was 17. He was in a really bad car accident, which was also traumatic to see him that way. His face, everything from here up was broken, and he looked like a bowling ball. His face was just so big and purple the first time I saw him, and I can still see that image in my head too. But we got married when I was 18, divorced by the time I was 19. He was abusive mentally, sometimes physically, but I don't hold that against him because I don't think he knew how to love anybody either. He came from a traumatic background as well. I was really close to his family, so it really hurt a lot to end that marriage. And I still talk with his sister and nieces and nephews on a regular basis. We did everything together. We hiked together. We exercised together. We'd go for long runs. He was my best friend, but also he was like Jekyll and Hyde. You never knew what you was going to get from him. And we spent a lot of time in our relationship drinking and getting high on various things. And that seemed to make it worse. When he was drinking, especially hard alcohol, I'm telling you, it was like a demon would come out of him. Like his eyes would get dark and you didn't know what you was going to get. And he was always fighting and beating people up. Him and his brothers and cousins were always fighting each other, and there was a lot of alcoholism in that family. So when we got divorced, I went looking to numb that pain with something stronger than, because alcohol wasn't doing it anymore. I wasn't feeling a satisfaction from smoking a cigarette like I used to. And I found methamphetamines. It didn't find me. I went looking for something to numb that pain, and I didn't know the devastation that it would bring to my life. I started using, I was 19, by the time I was 22, I was a full-blown addict. I was pregnant with my daughter and getting ready to get married again. I was able to get sober with both pregnancies. So I had my daughter in 2001. Grandpa died in 2002, and that spiral started happening again because I didn't know how to live without him. Ken Davis actually used to come over when I was in high school, and he would give me trivia questions. And he would come one week and ask me, well, I want you to look this up and give me a report on that. And the next time he'd come over, I'd have it ready to go to answer those questions. And that really meant a lot to me. It gave me something to do that was constructive, and I want to thank you for that. Him and my grandpa, that whole bunch of them were just amazing people, amazing men. Anyways, back to when Grandpa passed away, I had a really hard time with that. Him being at Adam's funeral home by himself. I knew he was gone, but I felt like he was there all alone, and it hurt to think of my grandpa with nobody around him. I mean, it was the few days before we buried him was hard, and I couldn't stay at his funeral when they lowered him into the ground because I didn't want to remember that. And I was already getting high again. I remember the last time I saw him, his skin looked a weird color, and he could barely raise his hand to wave to me, and after that I couldn't go over there anymore. It didn't keep me from going to see my grandma after that was said and done, but I know she knew I was high. I mean, she's not stupid. She grew up, in the 50s, 60s, 70s. She knew. And she kept telling me, Ken runs that house there in Ozark, you ought to talk to me. And I didn't have the courage to speak up, to say that I needed help, because at that time I still thought I was fine. About at the time my daughter was 5 or 6, I was pregnant with my son. I started having bad dreams about what happened to me in Texas, and it all started coming back. It started out with black and white. I didn't really see it in color. And there was just like flashes of memories, like the glasses he wore, his curly hair, his uniform, the white curtains he had in his kitchen. And then things started to come back in color, and I remember the nightgown I was wearing. I remember his daughters being in the room with me when he did this to me, and they would just lay there in their bed silent, and I couldn't understand at that point why they didn't speak up, but now I realize he was probably doing it to them too, and nobody stood up for them. And I often wonder what happened to those three little girls, no mother. I don't know, God knows where she was. So I got pregnant with my son, and there was some relief. I mean, he was sick when he was born. He had pyloric stenosis, and his stomach closed off, and there was 6 weeks of just vomiting, and couldn't keep my clothes clean. I couldn't even get in the shower. I couldn't leave him alone. I was just, it was a mess. No sleep. Stayed sober through all that because I was scared something would happen to him, and I'd be too high to take care of him. We spent about a week in the hospital. They did surgery and got all that fixed. Within 2 months, he was just a normal, healthy baby boy, like big old chubby cheeks, just happy as could be. And within 6 months, I was getting high again. I was thankful to God for saving my boy, but I still, that depression and anxiety in there of, am I a good enough mom? Did I do something wrong when I was pregnant that caused that? He was 3 years old. He was born in 2000. So about 2010, I was arrested the first time. Possession of controlled substance, a felony offense. I didn't want to leave the house that night. Everything in me was telling me to just stay home. But we live down at the other end of Ozark, and I was coming down here by Walmart. And they pulled me over, and they searched my car, and I went to jail, and I was confused. I didn't know what was going on. I'd never been in trouble for anything other than a speeding ticket before. And the judge, at first, Judge Waters was like, I'd been in there for window tint tickets and a speeding ticket. He said he was tired of looking at me. He's going to throw the book at me to expect to spend 2 to 5 years in jail. And when I went back, he was like, well, we've got a good attorney. I think I looked at your record. You've never been in trouble for anything other than speeding. I think you just need some help. And he recommended me to go to drug court in Judge Orr's office. It was in drug court. I was about 3 months in when I just had a breakdown one day, and I told my counselor, who was a male at that time, about this sexual assault, because that wasn't the only one I'd had throughout the years, but it was the one that really it was pronounced, the one that I tried to block out, and he recommended me for PTSD counseling. So instead of doing step work, I started talking to a counselor about PTSD, and the more I talked about it, the further away I withdrew from drug court friends, my family, my kids, my husband. There were so many times where that PTSD would pull me away from them, and I didn't know this time I was going to come back. I would get so deep into depression. I would lock myself in my room. I couldn't look anybody in the eyes. I felt nothing when my kids hugged me. My husband hugged me. We had a lot of marital problems on both ends, not just me but him too. But because he didn't know how to deal with me. He didn't know how to deal with like my sudden outburst of just anxiety from these memories coming back. I'm sure I was a handful to deal with at that time. So I went to drug court, and I managed to fake it all the way through. I did all my 100 hours of community service. I did all the classes I was supposed to do. Got through everything with my probation officer, and within 3 months after graduating, I was back smoking weed, and then within 3 more months I was back on methamphetamines. And this went on for 3 or 4 years. I got pulled over and arrested the second time. The second time I decided it'd be a good idea to fight with the cop. After he told me I was under arrest, I started swinging my arms, and 43 seconds may not seem like a long time, but when you're fighting a 200-pound cop, it's a long time, and it was very painful. I wouldn't recommend ever do anything like that. So that happened. I got arrested, and then I got the call from my dad that he was dying in California. We had already kind of made amends. He when my daughter was little, and I decided to just leave all that behind and try to get to know the man. And as he was dying, I couldn't go out there because I was facing 2 felony charges here. They wouldn't let me leave. I talked to his nurses and, his doctors and his caseworker, and I tried to explain to them, well, there's reasons that, me and my brothers and sisters aren't going out there. We don't know him. We don't want a stranger dying in our house. Like, we can't just, I don't know what you want us to do. And he had sent me a card during that time for my birthday that told me not to take life so seriously because I was missing out on all the fun. And the week before he got really sick, I was talking to him on the phone. He could still talk to me at that time and make sense before they gave him the morphine. And he's like, Sandy, me and your mom, we all went through hell to get you here. There's a reason I call you Angel. He was like, and it's not what you think it is. It's not just that fatherly love calling his daughter an angel. There's a reason. God, we went through hell to get you here. He's like, and you have a purpose. Please don't stay stuck any longer. And then the next week they called and he couldn't talk anymore. They would just hold the phone to his ear and he would mumble, but it didn't make any sense. And I really couldn't make sense of the nurses because it was all very thick Hispanic. It was LA County, California, so they all had that real thick Hispanic accent that I couldn't understand. And he passed away. I actually got the case dropped the day, March 31st, a year after I was arrested. They suspended the evidence or something. Like the case wasn't dropped. They could bring it back at any time for so many months afterwards. As long as I didn't get in trouble, it'd be fine. But so I called him and told him about that. He died April 19th. We was out walking around Wilson's Creek. I'm pretty sure I was still high at this time. But me and my family was out walking around Wilson's Creek that day after they called me and told me he passed away. And the mortuary called. And my dad, he was in and out our whole life. Like, it was nothing new for him to disappear. And especially on 4/19, he was a pothead, for crying out loud. The mortuary called me. Can I get a tissue or something? Here's a paper towel. The mortuary called me and said they lost his remains. And I just started laughing. And I was like, well, that, tomorrow's 4/20. You'll find him by morning. Like, it's just Dad doing his last, I got you. He's up there in the hereafter laughing at us right now. And had a great conversation with that guy. And it was the first time I was able to joke about my situation regarding him since I was alive. I was so busy. I was taught to be angry with him. My family was so angry with him. And it wasn't until my high school years that my grandpa realized that anger had caused hurt inside of me that they didn't mean to cause. And me and Grandpa had a really good talk about that. And he told me some good things about my father that I'd never heard. Everybody always talked bad about him and then would always tell me I was just like him. And so and I don't think they meant to harm me in that way, but it did a lot of damage to who I thought I would be. I thought I was just going to be just like him, an absent mother, like didn't really care for her kids. It was never really amounted to much. He was a worthless addict. If I was just like him, then I was destined to be a worthless addict too. It's a blood thing, right? Like, it's hereditary. And so all that happened. He died. They found his remains. They called me at 4:20 and told me they found his remains. And I laughed about it. It took me about 2 months, but I got off his paperwork, his DD-214s and all of his stuff from when he was in the military, and his plaque thing that the president signed and all that, and his death certificate. And I found out he had a wife and a daughter that looked just like me that he lost in Vietnam. And then he came back stateside and lost another wife and 3 kids. And so, his PTSD was already bad when he got back. He was violent. He was a drunk. He was... and I'm sure the night he raped my mom, or I don't know what happened, I wasn't there, but I'm sure, I doubt he was in his right mind. He was, back then they called it manic depressive, now they call it bipolar disorder, and he would have bouts where he would just go in the mountains and drink himself to death. And we wouldn't hear from him for a long time, and I didn't understand addiction enough to know that he didn't mean to be that way, that he just needed help. And so my anger, I never did anything to help or hurt him, really. I didn't want to hurt him, but I didn't know how to help him either, so I didn't know what to say to the man. But his advice not to stay stuck, that was something from God. That was a message, because I was stuck at that time, and he didn't know. I didn't tell him that I didn't know what my purpose was, but he could see that my wheels were just spinning in mud, and it was just flinging crap everywhere. And it was onto my kids and my family. And in 2017, my daughter was, she's getting close to graduating high school. We'd already missed out on a lot of her band stuff, working and just, not being too high to go. Let's just call it what it is. I was too high to want to go to any of her school functions. I felt needed at work. I felt more needed at work than I did at home, so I missed out on a lot. My husband started getting this feeling. I was getting sick, really sick at that point. My husband started getting this feeling that we just needed to give up the dope. And I was getting sicker and sicker. I was bleeding. My stomach was bleeding. My hemoglobin was really low from lack of blood flowing through the rest of my body. My pancreas shut down. I couldn't drive. I couldn't digest food anymore. I broke out in shingles on my back. Like, I was literally on my stomach on that couch just reading and trying to understand what he wanted me to do with my life. So we got baptized. Me, my husband, and my son all got baptized together on the same day. We started going to Purpose Church, and I met a man there named Dustin Kennedy, who told me about Dogwood Ranch and what they do for people with PTSD with the horses. So my first day, I'm headed out there. I'm lost. I had no idea where I was going. If I had known it was in Parch Corn Holler, I'd gotten right there, but I thought it was in Rogersville. So I'm on the phone, and I'm like, I'm lost. I'm almost there. I'm almost there. And I hang up, and a Smyrna Baptist Church just appears out of nowhere right in front of me. And I know Jesus was in that car with me, because I heard him go, "Do you remember where we first met? Can we start over?" And I sat there blocking the road for what felt like an eternity, just bawling my eyes out. Finally pulled it together and went out to Dogwood, and I started going through that counseling. In the meantime, I spent a lot of time in my Word. And I was down here right underneath the Jackson Street Bridge, reading out the book of Romans. For when I felt God whisper in my ear, the prisons, they're broken. Go. And I knew I was supposed to go to ministry school. I knew that those drug-induced days, it was just like that. I knew that all that was behind me, and that it was my chance to start over. The PTSD counseling at Dogwood, the first 6 weeks it went on pretty good, and then they wanted me to halter a horse, and I couldn't get her to stop. I couldn't get her to stand still. I didn't know what to do, and I just had a horrible breakdown right there. I was screaming. I was cussing profanities. I wanted to leave at my feet. I felt like my feet were nailed to the ground. Prior to this, I'd been on blood pressure medicine for close to 20 years, which I'm sure was a side effect of the methamphetamines. But after that breakdown that day, my blood pressure went back to normal. I was able to get off my blood pressure medicine. I haven't taken it in almost 3 years. We've been sober 3 years. And when God walked in, all that heartache I went through, all that guilt that I felt, the shame I felt over being sexually assaulted, feeling like it was my fault. Nobody did anything about it. Nathan dying, my feeling like I let family down, because I remember running into you at the DMV one day, and I was skinny. I remember the first time I met you too. I'm surprised I remember, because I was pretty high that day, I'm sure. God factored all that in. He knew all that was going to happen from before he formed me in my mother's womb. And that message my dad gave me about having a purpose for my life, that's why I know it was from God. because from that moment on, after I heard that, I would just like that would ring in my ears everywhere I would go. We've been sober now 3 years and a few months. My kids have found forgiveness. And I hate that we put them through that, but it really taught them from an early age that forgiveness is very important, that you can't, I didn't want them to feel what I felt towards my dad my whole life. I didn't want them to feel that towards me, and especially their father, because kids need their father. My marriage is a lot better. We've been married for 20 years, and only say about 17 of those years, it was horrible. I'm surprised we made it. But I wouldn't want to spend my life with anybody else. When he hugs me, he still gives me butterflies. I don't know that I could find that with anybody else. He takes really good care of us. My daughter has now graduated high school. She went to a year of college at MSU and decided she didn't want to be a teacher anymore. And so now she's kind of struggling to find her place in the world, but she'll get there. My son is 14, smart as a whip. He spends all of his time with me, so I'm sure he gets tired of seeing me as I'm his teacher. I just finished up my first year of Bible college. In high school, my GPA stayed about 2, like 2.0, maybe a little bit less, just enough to graduate. And my accumulated GPA is 3.81 right now. So I didn't think that would be possible after 25 years of addiction and what it did to my brain, but that just shows that God can reverse anything. And I was reading through the book of Acts the last couple of weeks that I've been down, and I got to chapter 22, and Paul, formerly Saul of Tarsus, was a very educated man. That man knew all the old scripture. He was a zealous Jew. He wanted to persecute all the Christians he could find. And I'm sure he could quote the Old Testament from beginning to end. So when he was arrested, I think it was in Rome, he felt, it was Jerusalem where they arrested him, and because he felt the Spirit leading him to go out there, even though his friends had talked him out of going. So when they asked him, when he decided to speak out there about, in his defense, about what he was doing, he chose to speak his testimony, his encounter with Jesus. He could have quoted Bible scripture. So please never underestimate the power of your testimony when it comes to helping somebody else. The Spirit will lead you to the right things to say. And I'm pretty sure it says in here somewhere that once we receive Christ into our heart, it is our duty to tell others about Christ. From that moment on, you don't have to work in full-time ministry. But it's like the outreach you want to do out here, just talking about living water with people is a big deal. And just please don't give up. Life gets hard, but it's impossible to do any of this without Jesus. Stay in your word. Talk to your mentors. They love you. They're great people. That's all.